Hi, I'm Robert Chabilski alongside Benjamin Stevens. This is a special edition of Stony Brook Newsbreak with our post-election coverage.
America has decided, and Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States, when it was expected to be a razor-tight and historic race. So far, he has won 292 electoral votes with only 270 required to win. 4 years ago, Donald Trump came up short, losing to Joe Biden after the country waited days for the results, but not the case this time. It took a couple of hours after the polls closed, and Donald Trump is heading back to the White House. With this, Donald Trump becomes the second president in U.S. history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms in office. He will also be the oldest person to assume the presidency after being sworn in January. The president-elect, as it is now, made economy and immigration the 2 priorities for his campaign, and as we've seen that these issues have been resonating with the American public. It's been quite a campaign, quite a year. He survived an assassination attempt in July when a gunman shot him in the ear at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. That was just days before he formally accepted his party's nomination. Just a few months later, the Secret Service foiled yet another alleged assassination plot at one of his golf courses in Florida.
Every single day I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
As he takes office, he continues to face dozens of criminal charges, including for election interference, all of which he has denied. With this win, of course, his running mate, Senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, becomes the youngest vice president in more than 70 years. J.D. Vance just turned 40 in August, becoming, again, the youngest this country has seen.
Donald Trump has won the presidential election with 292 electoral votes to, at this moment, Kamala Harris's 224. Trump only required 270 electoral votes to win, and having far surpassed that number, the road to victory was an easy one for Trump this time around. Key victories in the Electoral College for Trump included states like Florida, which is worth 30 electoral votes, and Texas, which is worth 40. Trump also scored some important victories in swing states, like Pennsylvania, which is worth 19, North Carolina and Georgia, which are both worth 16 apiece, and Wisconsin, which is worth 10. This marks a change since the last election, as Trump had previously lost in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Here's Sky Crabtree to tell us more about how the Electoral College works.
During the 2016 election, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton won more votes than her opponent, former President Donald Trump. Despite this, Trump still won the election because of a system known as the Electoral College, a group of people who actually provide the votes that technically elect the president.
Let's say that the Republican wins the most votes in the popular vote in a state. So they win then the state's electoral votes.
Established by the Constitution, the Electoral College is as old as the country itself. It's always been a controversial system. In fact, over 700 proposals have been made to reform or remove it, according to the National Archives. Some have criticized the system for giving certain states too much sway in the election, leading to politicians campaigning the most in what are commonly referred to as swing states. In fact, the Pew Research Center recently found that more than 6 in 10 Americans would prefer to eliminate the Electoral College system.
So there's a reform effort called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, where at the state level, states have voted to join this compact, and they say that if the popular vote winner is misaligned from the Electoral College vote winner, they promise to award their electors to the popular vote winner insofar as enough states have signed on with this compact. We haven't gotten the critical mass yet, and most of the signatories are Democratic states, but there are these kind of like efforts to think about reforming the Electoral College system to map the popular vote.
In the end, the Electoral College is designed to ensure that every state has a voice in selecting who will become the next president of the United States, though whether it accomplishes that goal or not is largely up to interpretation. This has been Sky Crabtree, reporting for SBU Journalism.
For more on swing states, we're joined by our correspondent Sky Crabtree and Professor Engelhardt, who have closely followed the swing states.
As a political scientist, right, why are those appealing to so many voters, and what effect could it really have realistically on the economy?
Yeah, so I think just generally we don't like paying taxes, right? We work, we want our money, right? So saying that you're going to cut taxes kind of makes sense, because in the grand scheme of things, all I see is my paycheck and I see what's taken out. I know that some of it's going to the government generally for the cost of providing roads or other services, and I know some of it is going into paying for Social Security, Medicare, right, my old age insurance. But we don't really actually get to trace our dollar to what that program is. So it's fairly straightforward for somebody to come in and say, I'm going to cut taxes, right, because then we have more cash in our pockets, right? Whether tax decreases are actually a way to stimulate economic growth seems to actually maybe not have a lot of support from economists. And then in terms of tariffs, it kind of makes sense on its face to say, I'm going to raise the cost of goods that other countries are sending, because it's hard for us as consumers to trace back the prices we're paying at, say, the grocery store back to the actual cost of the goods that are being brought in. But those are goods that, those are costs that economists tell us pass on to consumers.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have. We really appreciate you coming here, providing us with your expert opinion as we, continue to process these election results. Right, back to you guys at the desk.
With countless potential outcomes, Donald Trump shocked the nation after winning every projected swing state. North Carolina and Georgia were the first of these crucial states to be called, leaving a slim path to victory for Harris. The race then remained to be undecided until Pennsylvania and Wisconsin were called later in the morning. Concerns about states being undecided for days, as in the 2020 election, appeared to be dispelled after a clear victory for Donald Trump.
Now let's continue our coverage with a professor from the School of Communication and Journalism, Professor Musa Al-Gharib.
Welcome back to the School of Communication and Journalism's ongoing election results coverage. I'm Sky Crabtree. I'm joined here in the studio by Musa Al-Gharib, a sociologist and professor in Stony Brook School of Communication and Journalism. Musa, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, as a sociologist by trade, I'd love to hear from a background of, someone with your academic knowledge, just about what you think about the results and the demographics, the turnout of this election.
I think the results are difficult to fit into a lot of existing narratives about why Trump has been successful or why Trump has support. So for instance, one of the things that my research shows is that over the last, the whole time that Trump has been on the political stage, the Republican Party has seen increasingly losses with white voters. At the same time, over this same period, over the last decade, Democrats have been seeing consistent attrition with voters of color. And so one of the things that was interesting to me going into the election, given that both parties have been alienating these core constituencies, it seemed to me that whoever managed to alienate their core constituencies marginally less would be the one who ended up winning. And it looks like that's what happened. The Republican Party did, in fact, continue to lose among white voters compared to previous cycles, but Kamala was not able to pull it off because the Democratic Party lost an even larger share of non-white voters.
Right. I'd like to ask you about one demographic, woman in particular. Now, in pre-election polling, a lot of results showed that Harris had a strong lead with women voters. A lot of people attributed this to her having a freer stance with abortion rights. But in the actual polling, the actual election results show that Harris actually had a slight drop with women compared to Joe Biden's performance in the 2020 election. So as a sociologist, I'd love to hear, and if you could sort of explain your thoughts on why that discrepancy occurred, why, pre-election polling showed her having such a strong lead with women voters, but then when the election actually comes around, she loses some of them?
Well, I think one of the things that's important to bear in mind is that one ways in which polls differ from electoral outcomes is that electoral outcomes are decided by who shows up to vote. So if you do a nationally representative sample, but the subset of Americans who comes out to vote is not nationally representative, then you might expect to see some of this discrepancy. So I think one of the things that happened is that some of the people who might have supported Harris over Trump in principle in their hearts or whatever just stayed home. They didn't show up to vote. So I think that's part of, and when you look at the total votes that each candidate got, Trump did get less votes than last cycle, but Harris got many, many, many millions fewer votes than Joe Biden did in 2016 overall. So I think turnout is part of that. But I'll say, I really like the fact that I really love the focus on women and their agency. One of the ways I think that a lot of the analysis about gender in the election sometimes goes wrong is there's often this really big focus on men and on how men exercise their agency and whether or not men are sexist. But actually women are a larger share of the electorate than men consistently. They also vote at higher levels. And so how women exercise their agency is actually just objectively more important to understanding electoral outcomes than looking at men. And this is even more important if we're trying to understand why a historic female candidate, her performance on the ballot. I think it's even more important than ever to look at how women exercise their agency. And unfortunately for Harris, there was some disappointing news there.
Right, and in terms of people of color, we also saw Trump making significant gains with that group as a whole. And despite this, many people, correlate Trump with this almost, rhetoric, these policies that would be unhelpful to that particular group with focuses on, with his stance on things like immigration, civic justice reforms, things of that nature. And a lot of, people have correlated him with being, just not helpful for people of color. And yet he saw gains with that group. Again, same as last question, just your overall thoughts on that would be great.
Well, I think there's kind of a couple ways that analysts sometimes have trouble understanding this dynamic. One of them is that a lot of us who work in fields like journalism or sociology tend to think in really intersectional ways. So if a candidate says something bad about one minority group, we assume that most other minority voters will react negatively to that as well. But that's just not the way that most people in the world think. So that's one issue. And then the second issue is that a lot of the issues that are coded as being relevant for Hispanics or coded as being relevant for African Americans, they are issues that black voters or Hispanic voters care about a lot, but the positions that a lot of these voters take is often different from what progressives assume or might hope their position would be. So for instance, among Hispanics and Latinos, a lot of Hispanic and Latino people are very concerned about border security and are actually supportive of restrictions on immigration. Among African Americans, a lot of black people have significant safety concerns, and actually they support a lot of Trump's language around law and order and things like this actually resonate strongly with a lot of African Americans rather than alienating them. And then as it relates to people outside of their own group or issues outside of their own group, this is where this kind of lack of intersectional thinking among normie voters really becomes important. So if you look at the Democratic coalition, if you look at which voters are most supportive of things like the Muslim ban, well, that would be black voters and Hispanic voters. A lot of black and Hispanic voters are Christians. They view Islam as a false and dangerous religion, and if someone is going to have less Muslims in the country, they aren't necessarily opposed to that. And the same thing is true on a lot of LGBTQ issues. If you look at who in the Democratic coalition is kind of least warm on things like gender-affirming care for minors or teaching about LGBTQ issues in the classroom and stuff, it's black voters, it's Hispanic voters, especially compared to white voters. And so a lot of the issues that Trump was campaigning on are things that, especially to progressives, highly educated progressives, white progressives, we look at these kinds of narratives and policy positions from Trump, and we assume that, of course, all of these other non-white and other constituencies would recoil in horror. But the reality is not that way. And if we actually look at pay more attention to the actual public opinion trend lines on these particular issues, instead of making strong assumptions based on how people should think or should vote based on their race or ethnicity, then we can get a lot more. Then some of these electoral results would be less surprising than they were to a lot of scholars.
Well, thank you. Well, we do have to wrap up, but I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate these great insights that you were able to provide on our show today. Thank you, Musa.
Thank you again for having me. It's been great.
All right, back to you.
Now for a little background information about the 45th president and current president-elect Donald Trump. Hi, I'm here with Professor Stanley Feldman, a professor of political science at Stony Brook University. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, Professor Feldman. So obviously the results trickling in from last night and more data coming out this morning. Interesting to say the least. What are your first impressions of the data that's come out thus far and President Trump being reelected to be the 47th president?
Basically, what we know is that there has been a not very large, but large enough swing across the country compared to the election 4 years ago. So if you look at virtually every state and most counties, what you see is Trump doing better than he did by a few percentage points 4 years ago, and Harris doing somewhat worse than Biden did. So it looks like a pretty uniform swing across the country. Democratic states voted somewhat more Republican. Republican states voted somewhat more Republican. In a close election, a few percentage points change is the difference between winning and losing the Electoral College.
And you'd spoken about this a little bit earlier and last night as well. You had pointed to Biden's approach to the economy and Trump's approach to the economy as a reason why so many states have moved more towards red. Do you want to elaborate on that?
It's been clear for a while that a lot of people remain quite upset about inflation. And that, exit polls certainly showed that for a sizable fraction of the public, the economy was the major issue. And the major issue in the economy was rising prices. We had a sharp increase in prices after COVID. The cost of consumer goods increased much faster than wages, so people saw their disposable income decline, and people were clearly upset, and rightly or wrongly, the Biden administration was blamed by many people for that inflation.
And do you think that same drive towards the economy and want to get away from inflation is what led so many, we've seen groups like Latinos specifically endorsed and voted for Trump way more than the previous campaign when Trump won. You think this is the same reason?
I think it certainly is one of the major reasons. We'll need more time to really look at all the factors in the election and how they played out. But I think it's fair to say at this point that enough people were upset about the state of the economy, rising prices, and blamed the Biden administration and obviously carried over to his Vice President Kamala Harris for that inflation and for not being able to control prices. And so, yes, I think at least some amount of the change in votes that we saw yesterday compared to 4 years ago was certainly due to people being really upset about prices and placing blame on the Biden administration for that.
You had mentioned before we started recording the segment that in all aspects, for the most part, right, Vice President Harris ran a really good campaign, and she did that in a really short amount of time from after the debate performance by President Biden over the summer. From when he decided to step down, she took over. She put this campaign up in a matter of days and was able to run through November here. Trump has been running for re-election since he lost back in 2020. Trump's messaging, for the most part, right? A lot of it's been about the economy, how the economy was so great when he was in office, how he's going to help lower gas prices, groceries going to go down. How much of that is true, and can he actually impact for the American voter that went into the ballot box yesterday and voted for Trump to help their wallet?
You know, the ironic part of this is that if you look at the economic situation, inflation is now under control. It is virtually back to the approximate 2% range that the U.S. Fed considers to be normal increases in prices. When barring any massive changes between now and January, when Donald Trump takes office again, he will in fact inherit an economy in which inflation is under control. What happens at that point depends upon how he follows through on some of his campaign promises, what Congress is willing to do in terms of the economy. I think, you know, it's hard to say what the impact will be until we really start seeing campaign rhetoric turn into actual policies. But the fact is that when Donald Trump takes office again, he will inherit a very sound economy with low unemployment, with significant economic growth, and with normal levels of inflation. So the question is, will his policies maintain that? It's historically, the U.S. economy rarely performs much better than it does now. So the question is there anything that he can do to improve it? We'll have to see.
So, sorry, I don't know if I interrupted
No,
you,
you're good.
But to build off of what you're saying, So like you said, the economy was a major factor of why people chose Trump over Kamala. However, like you're saying, the economy was already doing better. Do you think maybe this was a failure of the Democratic Party to advertise that the economy was doing better?
That's tough to do. People still remember price increases, right? And so they still go to the supermarket and notice that things cost more than they did several years ago. A lot of people don't really understand how inflation works. So, when unemployment goes up, the situation's cured when unemployment comes down. When inflation goes up, inflation is cured when it stops going up. Prices don't go down, right? In fact, economists don't want prices to go down because disinflation is really bad for the economy. It takes a while for people to just recognize that these are the new normal prices and stop fretting over prices that they're comparing to several years ago. It's very hard if you're the incumbent party to deal with that.
Okay.
We really appreciate all of your insight and for taking the time to join us today. I know your schedule is really busy, so we really appreciate that. Thanks for joining us, Professor Feldman.
Thank you.
Now let's shift our focus back here to campus. We're heading over to Imra Ahmed, who will show us the voting events in the Recreation Center.
Hello everyone, my name is Imra Ahmed, and I'm outside of the Stony Brook Rec Center, where students are casting their vote for the 2024 election. Join me as we explore the perspectives of students as they exercise their right to vote as they shape the future of our country. Let's get started.
It's my first time voting. I voted last week. I was an early voter, and it was very easy for me because they had it in my school. So I just went and signed up when I was 17. So I pre-registered, which I think more people should know about because you can pre-register even if you're 16 or 17 in New York State. You can pre-register, and it's just a great way to get it out of the way and just make sure that you're registered.
Yeah, this is my first time voting. I registered on campus, and I found it to be a really easy process. I found the resources at the Center for Civic Justice. They had a lot of workshops to get students to register, and I found that pretty simple process to register for my campus on address and then vote at the Recreation Center.
Age group of college students have the lowest voter turnout, so definitely if we can get them to vote and they go and use their voice and use their rights, then it will have an impact on the country and will feel more represented in politics.
I feel good about the accessibility for college students at Stony Brook just because they've had tables where you could register to vote for weeks here, and they also have and then you can put your address here so people can vote at the rec center here, so it makes it pretty accessible for all students here.
The biggest challenge facing young voters today is aligning themselves with bipartisanship. I think especially in this election compared to others throughout history, it's a lot more apparent that there's a clear divide between the two parties in America right now, and I think a lot of young voters are failing to really see themselves represented either of parties.
Listen, it's very important for us students to go out and vote because we're not just voting for the president, we're voting for local issues, we're voting for the counties, we're voting for the state. It's a lot, it's not just president.
Next up, we have Professor Sandro Brusco, who is currently a professor of economics at the Department of Economics and the College of Business here at Stony Brook University. Professor Brusco, a lot of times when voters go to the polls and their top issue, a lot of times it's going to be the economy. And a lot of them, for me personally, right, when I think of the economy, I think of two things. How is the stock market doing? And what am I paying for gas and bread and milk at the grocery store? How is a second Trump term going to affect Wall Street and then Main Street with the cost of goods that consumers are paying for?
The effect on Wall Street is hard to say in the sense that Boston has been doing so well anyway under any kind of president lately that I have a hard time thinking of policies that could help Wall Street doing much better than it has done under the Biden administration, for example. Now, the Trump administration did something that surely helped the stock market, which was the tax cut for the corporate income tax that was brought from 28 to 29% with the tax reform of the end of 2017. I have a hard time believing that it can deliver another cut of that size. And some company, and then the rest of the policies that he has promised, in particular tariffs, that will positively affect some firms and negatively affect other firms. Just to say a pretty obvious point, firms that concentrate their business in shipping we're losing big today. Because people expected less international trade and therefore less transportation. Other firms may benefit from that.
Building off what you're saying with the tariffs, that's been one of the major economic strategies that Trump has been pushing. How do you think that would affect the American economy? Is that what the Democrats were claiming to be a national tax, income tax? Is that true, that standpoint?
Oh yeah, I think this is one of the rare things on which I think all economists agree. A tariff is a tax on American consumers. It's a particularly bad tax because it distorts market. So it lowers the efficiency of both the American and the world economy. And it's also a regressive tax because it's being a consumption tax, it eats the most those who spend most of their income on consumption, which are typically the low-income families. So from that point of view, it's surely going to be bad. It's hard to say how serious the increase in tariffs will be. By the way, it's not like the Biden administration did much to decrease the tariffs that were put in the first Trump term. It looks like American policymakers have become more tolerant toward tariffs, surely more than the average economist would like.
I'm glad you brought those tariffs up too. Is there any key difference between those old tariffs that are still in place from the first Trump administration in 2016 to the new ones that he's proposed that he intends to put in place?
Well, again, if we are to believe to what was said in the electoral campaign, which may or may not be a wise thing, the tariff should be higher and broader. So you should have a greater impact on international commerce. And then, of course, no one has really thought through the end game, how the other countries are going to react to that, especially China and Europe. That could really change a lot in terms of the total impact of the tariffs on the economy.
Okay.
Let me say also one thing. It's talking about tariffs was one of the rare occasions in which, on the campaign trail, they were talking about increasing taxes, because that's what it is, it's a tax. Increasing taxes is going to be necessary given the current public deficit that the United States have. I personally think that other type of taxes should be raised and other types of expenditure should be cut to restore a budget, a balanced budget. But hey, that's what we have.
Okay.
You spoke a little bit about the effects that this second term will have on corporations, how these proposed tariffs, it's a tax on the consumer for goods coming from overseas. A lot of the messaging from Trump on the campaign trail was lowering cost of goods, bringing the economy back to a place. Earlier, a guest had said that for the most part, inflation has settled down right around to 2%, which is the norm. is the dollar, is the consumer's spending power, is it going to be greater in these next 4 years?
Oh, that's hard to say, but it will mostly depend on the monetary policy that the Fed will put in place. So if you think, usually when people think of spending power, they don't think about the exchange rate. But a great part of your spending power depends on how strong the dollar is and how cheap foreign goods are for us. It's likely that the dollar, at least for a while, will be stronger because there will be more fiscal expansion, I think, and the Federal Reserve will keep interest rates high to avoid the economy getting too hot. That is typically, the high interest rate will keep the dollar strong. How long that is going to happen and whether it will be enough to match the increasing the cost that will come from tariffs, that we don't know. That will really depend on how the other countries will react with, setting tariffs themselves and so on and so forth.
Okay. Well, it's been really great speaking with you, Professor. I'm really glad that you had the time to come out here. Robert, can you shake his hand for me? He's all the way over there.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank
you, sir. Now let's head to the newsroom where professor and co-chair of the Department of Economics at Stony Brook, Juan Conesa, is sitting with our own Mackenzie Post.
Hello everyone, welcome. Today I have the privilege of interviewing our next guest, professor and co-chair of the Department of Economics at Stony Brook University, Juan Conesa. Welcome, Professor. How are you today?
Very good. Happy to be here.
It's lovely to meet you. We had a brief conversation before, but I'm just going to dive right into our conversation. So my first question, many economists have predicted a possible recession. Do you think the U.S. is at risk of a recession in the coming years, and what indicators should we be watching closely?
Okay. I mean, the first thing I would like to point out is that all of us and people out there blame politicians or give credit to politicians for things that they don't deserve either blame or credit. Recessions are something that happen periodically, and it's very difficult to claim that somebody can avoid them or somebody has to be blamed for them. We have a very recent experience with pandemics and wars and all kinds of phenomena that nobody could ever anticipate. Now, having said that, it seems like the incoming administration is gonna inherit an economy that you could characterize as quite healthy. We are talking about an economy with income per capita of more than $80,000, an unemployment rate of 4%, and an inflation rate that is currently under control. So the economy looks healthy, and there is no particular reason to expect a recession, but yet stuff happens, and it's difficult to anticipate. Yes.
Absolutely. One thing about Trump is previously he tried to emphasize job creation, but the labor market has changed significantly post-COVID. How do you think his policies for his future term will address the labor shortages or the current economic state?
I haven't seen much in his electoral program about policies specifically addressed to the labor market per se, but one of his, star policies is about immigration and limiting more the scope of immigration in the U.S. That has potentially important effects, as you were mentioning, for labor shortages in certain sectors. Think, for example, of agricultural sector, food processing, slaughterhouses. All of those sectors are very sensitive to immigration policy.
This was so insightful. Thank you so much, Professor. It's been an honor to interview you today and get your expert opinion, especially for students out here. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And back to you at the studio.
As the election results are rolling in, the Senate has flipped from Democrat majority to Republican one. The Republicans have won at least 52 out of the 100 seats in the Senate, with the Democrats winning only 43 so far, guaranteeing the Republican Party the majority in the Senate. Notable victories for the Republicans in the senatorial election include, but are not limited to, Jim Justice, the Republican governor, who won his race in West Virginia, Republican businessman Bernie Moreno, who won the senator race in Ohio, and Republican Tim Shea, who won in Montana. Each of the aforementioned Republicans unseated their Democrat counterpart, replacing Senators Joe Manchin, Sherrod Brown, and John Tester.
With Trump having won the election and Republicans gaining control of the Senate, eyes now turn to the House of Representatives, which NBC News still says is a toss-up for each party. Currently, the Democrats have 178 seats, while Republicans have 203. Either party needs to reach 218 seats in order to win control of the House. Where the Senate majority has already been awarded to the GOP, if Republicans can take control of the House, it would greatly lower any opposition to policy that Trump may try to implement in his second term.
So I've just been reelected again. But we're going to be prepared to lead because we are facing the greatest collection of challenges that our country has faced probably since World War II, if not the Civil War. We're on the verge of World War III. You have our adversaries that have seen weakness projected on the world stage. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are actually coordinating together right now. These are very serious times, and we have to take it seriously. And you need serious leaders, and you need a new direction. Everywhere I've been around the country, and I told you how many cities and places and events I've done, everybody's fed up and fired up. They're fed up about the cost of living and the rising crime rates and the wide open border and the weakness on the world stage. But we have the solutions to all that.
Now, my co-anchor Benjamin Stevens is going to give us an in-depth overview on President Donald Trump's chosen Vice President, J.D. Vance.
James David Vance is a 40-year-old Republican senator from the state of Ohio and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's running mate. Born in Middleton, Ohio on August 2nd of 1984, Vance graduated high school in 2003 before joining the Marine Corps and serving for about 4 years during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Following his military career, Vance attended Ohio State University, where he majored in political science and philosophy before studying law at Yale Law School, where he met his wife, Usha Vance, before graduating in 2013. Vance briefly worked as a lawyer before gaining notoriety for his book titled Hillbilly Elegy, which was published in 2016 and went on to become a New York Times bestseller and was later turned into a movie on Netflix in 2020. Following his success in law and literature, Vance ran for office in Ohio and won the 2022 Ohio Senate election, becoming a senator. Later on July 15 of 2024, Trump announced on the social media site Truth Social that Vance would be his running mate and choice as vice president. Vance's political beliefs are extensive and varied over the years. While Vance is currently Trump's running mate, he had once expressed a dislike for Trump, having publicly and privately talked down about him. Vance on abortion has previously described himself as 100% pro-lifer and has since removed the page on his website. However, more recently, he has downplayed his stance on abortion. Vance, like Trump, has been consistently very in support of stricter border regulations and building a border wall. As for foreign policy and economic policy, Vance has backed Trump's policies aimed at cutting taxes and implementing strict trade tariffs. This has been Benjamin Stevens.
I was in 8th grade during the 2016 election, and something my history teacher at the time, Mr. Fernandez, said to me was that when we stop rooting for political parties like we root for baseball teams, our country will be in a better place. And that statement's resonated with me since I'm 13, and it's something I've been playing in my head a lot this morning. If you went to the ballot box in the past few weeks for early voting or stood in the lines yesterday, thank you. You did your civic duty to make your voice heard. and took part in our country's greatest strength, our democratic process, helping make the decision for who you want to lead our country for the next 4 years. John Avalon, who lost his congressional race for New York's 1st District, tweeted this earlier today. I will always remain a happy warrior in my heart, and I know that we will continue fighting the good fight because our country and our community are worth fighting for. Now, whether you voted for President Donald Trump or were hoping for Vice President Kamala Harris to make history, now is the time to bring the country together for the better of one another, for the better of our neighbors, and for the better of our country as we move forward. I'm Robert Chabilsky.
And I'm Benjamin Stevens. Thank you for tuning in to this special edition of Stony Brook Newsbreak.